All right. Well, Janice, welcome. I'm glad that you are here with me at the Art of Monetizing a Podcast panel. And so now we are just going to have a great dialogue between the two of us around monetization of podcasting. So why don't we start? Why don't you introduce yourself first? That would be great. And then I'll introduce myself and then we'll just get right into the discussion.
Sounds like a great idea, Tracy. So I'm Janice Sutherland, and what's the best way to describe me? I'm an executive coach or women's leadership development expert, and I work with women globally, transitioning in their roles, stepping up to leadership, emerging into different roles. That seems to be happening a lot right now. My claim to podcasting is I have a podcast called This Woman Can. And I am everything on the podcast, interview women from across the Caribbean diaspora, talking about their leadership challenges, their career challenges, and how they navigate the issues or the challenges that women face stepping into leadership or navigating their career, and specifically with Caribbean, as I said, or diaspora women, because I wanted to highlight those women in particular, because what you probably can't tell from my accent is that I am Caribbean descent and I live in the Caribbean. So it felt natural to highlight those women.
Well, I have to say your accent is lovely. It is absolutely beautiful. What is that phrase? I could listen to you read the phone book. So I'm sure that you're experiencing a lot of great success with podcasting. So I'll take just a minute to introduce myself as well for the people who are watching the recording. So my name is Tracy DeForge, and I own a company called Produce Your Podcast, which is a full service podcast consulting, production, marketing, and distribution agency. And we do everything for you. Basically, we are the people that do all the heavy lifting. So people like you, Janice, can have fun doing the podcast and focus just on your content and keep it fun. I also recently, meaning a little over a year ago, launched a community for podcasters called Pod Hive. And it is an online community for podcasters because not everybody needs or wants a full service podcast production, but everybody deserves access to really good, credible podcasting information. So that's I have a ton of fun with that. I am a podcaster also. I host a podcast called Journey to There, exploring the intersection between personal and business growth. And it's based on my story of being just a pure entrepreneurial junkie and total workaholic, like 12-step worthy workaholic. And so I interview women primarily that talk about their stories in terms of their journey in that intersection between personal and business growth, because as women entrepreneurs, as you know, and with the women that you talk to, we're all struggling with, I don't really even consider it a balance. I literally consider it an intersection. So that's my primary podcast. And then, of course, we've launched several networks, and I also host some podcasts for our clients. So that's a really nice opportunity. But today we are here to talk about monetizing a podcast, which as a podcast producer myself and having a podcast focused company, I get a lot of questions around monetization and what does that mean? So let's start by asking you, Janice, what is monetization of a podcast? How would you define it in general? And what does that mean to you as a podcaster?
Great question. And I would say if I was in, sometimes monetization really applies to those bigger podcasts. I have a very niche podcast. And monetization, I suppose, in the additional sense, is how do you use your podcast to generate revenues? Coming from a purely business perspective, I think if persons go into podcasting expecting a pot of gold at the end of a proverbial rainbow, they're going to be sorely disappointed.
At least at the beginning.
So I think monetization, additional sense would be, you maybe get ad revenue, you get some sort of sponsorship revenue, but some way that is directly tied to your to your production that actually generates finances.
Right. And I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I would add to that is when we're looking at monetization in general, we look at a couple of different perspectives. So one is, like you were saying, is that traditional monetization pathway where you either have someone who endorses your, someone who wants to participate in your podcast from an advertising or sponsorship perspective. So they may either provide you product or invest in you doing what's called a live read. And live reads are when you are personally endorsing a brand or a product. And then more of the traditional radio model, which is something that is really happening a lot. In fact, I saw by 2023, there's supposed to be over $2 billion being invested in podcast advertising alone, whereas in 2019, the projections were 459 million. And so then if you look at the trajectory of 4 years later, going from 459 million to over 2 billion, that's a really, really big pathway. And I think what that means is a lot of traditional people who may have traditionally bought radio advertising are now looking at podcasts. And a lot of the reason is because, like you were saying, you have a niche podcast. And so with a niche podcast, you are reaching a targeted audience of women that are engaged with you as a host. And even with a smaller audience, they will definitely be able to benefit from some exposure to brand or product. Have you ever had any experience with that in terms of either marketing your own products within your podcast? Because that's another great way of monetization that people overlook.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you asked the question, I came from the traditional monetization angle that people would naturally think of. And I knew very early on, because the podcast was so niche and so targeted, that I had to get a little more creative or rethink the way I thought at monetization. It wasn't going to help me retire. It wasn't going to do that, in that traditional sense. So I looked at monetization as, I suppose, the spin-offs of having the podcast. So yes, I do talk about my own products and programs that I run periodically throughout the year. I talk about that. I sometimes get a chance to collaborate with some of my guests, especially if they're very good. You never quite know what you're going to get sometimes. But sometimes you have a real synergy with them. And it's like, wow, we could do a nice collaboration here. And I've done a good few collaborations that way. There's the spin-offs with talking. People want to know, as you said, my voice. People want to hear you over camera, what you're going to sound like over a microphone. So I've often used the podcast as examples of work, of how I work and how I sound and how I interview. So there's that, and there's introductions, and just basically people get to know you as a thought leader in your space. I've been doing this a number of years now, and it's become more of it's almost a hobby, because I genuinely enjoy the conversations I have with women. So, and that's for me, and that bigger network, that bigger exposure of who they can connect you to for some other peripheral products is where I look at my monetization. That's been my angle for monetization.
Sure. So you have a coaching business, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So one of the things that I like to encourage people when they have a service-based business, especially, it's very difficult in the competitive nature of the coaching industry, and to really be able to identify like who it is that you want to work with and what benefits can they bring to you as a customer and or a client as for a coach. So I believe that podcasting can be a really great way for people to listen and hear your style, hear how you're communicating with other women. You probably maybe even do a little bit of spontaneous coaching within your podcast interviews, I would imagine, when there's that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, because the questions I use, I have a structure around. So I ask the women relatively the same questions, but sometimes we go down the rabbit hole when I get a little more inquisitive about what their answers are. And invariably, they're all around coaching. They're all coaching type questions, prompted to, get them to think. And quite often they've never been asked those questions before. How does success feel? And it's like, oh, oh, how does success feel? Never thought about it that way, and how would you navigate if you were faced this challenge? What would you do? How would you get out of it? What would you know? So all the questions are pretty much coaching based questions, and sometimes can get pretty deep
Right.
when people, and they'll sometimes come off a call of an interview and women will go, I never meant to say as much as that. I never meant to say as much as that when I was talking to you. But it's fine. You were comfortable. You felt
Right.
that comfortable to release or reveal that kind of information. So it works both ways.
Right. So I think that, when we talk about monetization and when we started this conversation today, the first default thought goes to traditional advertising because it's what we've known, it's what we've grown up with. We're bombarded with impressions from digital marketing, social media, podcasting, YouTube, TikTok. I mean, the list, and now Clubhouse. So it just keeps going on and on. But I think especially for podcasters who are just starting out, it can feel really overwhelming to even think about sponsorship. But I encourage people to do exactly like what you were saying, which is use your podcasting as a vehicle for people to get to know you, understand how you do business. Really, you use the word comfortable, and I think that's a powerful word with podcasting because you're building an intimate relationship, especially through audio. I mean, a lot of people are using video for podcasts now. Because I have a traditional radio background, I'm what a self-proclaimed audio purist, but it's because I really feel like when you're not doing anything but just listening, you can really hear that authenticity in your voice. You can hear your style. And as a result of that, someone listening to you and getting nuggets and takeaways from your podcast go, hey, she's really good at what she does. I would like to work with her as a coaching client. And like that's monetization, right? Because you're taking a listener and you're converting them into a paid customer. So let's talk a little bit about when you're doing your podcast, do you have any specific call to actions, for example? Like, do you use a call to action to drive people back to maybe your website or where they can find out more about your service offerings?
I do. So I also have, for This Woman Can Now, I recently started an online community. So what I was finding is that women wanted more information or ways they could connect. And so it's another networking opportunity. So I created an online community, thiswomancan.coach, where women can go and sign up for free. They can connect. I put lots and lots of content, quality content, things they can look at, articles, quotes, motivations. And again, it's another opportunity for me to promote a program when it's coming up. And once a month, what I'd also do is do a get together. So I'd have a live Zoom call. So again, we get to connect, we get to network. And again, it's all about building relationships, people by people. It's that traditional. So it gives them an opportunity to get to know me, and talk. And we sometimes have a topic of the week, of the month we're going to talk about. What's the challenge you're facing? And we'll coach through that in a group setting as well. So so there's a call to action there, or sign up to a newsletter. Depending what I feel like at that particular time, try and vary it up in different ways.
Well, and you brought up another point where I think sometimes, again, with monetization, and I love the name of this panel is The Art of Monetizing a Podcast, because it's not just a one-way, one-lane type of opportunity. So there are two things I'd love to highlight in what you just said. And one is building a membership community. So I had mentioned at the very beginning of the call that once I had my full service business up and running, I realized we can't service a large mass of people because we're high touch customer service and that's the way we're based. But having the opportunity to have a community then allows people to almost become a funnel into the full service podcast production business. So maybe they start out as a DIY podcaster, for example, and they're learning the ropes, and then they realize, oh, this is way more than I expected. I really like working with Tracy on the coaching calls and the one-on-one sessions and things like that. Maybe I'll explore her business produce your podcast. So I can see that happening a lot for you in terms of, so you have your podcast, you have some coaching like conversations on your podcast. Your call to action is to join the community. They go into the community, maybe that you're not monetizing the community directly with a flat membership fee like we do with PodHab. However, they get connected to each other. They're getting to experience you on the Zoom calls. And again, that funnels them into being a client of yours, and that's monetization. So that I wanted to highlight sort of that pathway through monetization, but then I also wanted to come back to a point that you made about content creation, because content creation is one of the most overlooked assets of podcasting that I think people really miss. For me, what I like to explain to people who are starting out, podcasting can be time intensive. It can be expensive depending on how you, if you outsource or you don't, or even expensive in terms of your time as an asset. So that resource itself. So with content creation, the podcast can really be the hub of your content creation. So you can create podcast once, right? And then I don't know if you are using this formula, but we like to talk about like step up to the mic, have your interview, create your content, transcribe it, have it written into blog posts. It seems like you're also creating maybe some course content or maybe some online workshops, or you could take all of your podcasts that you're all these interviews with the women who can, and in that case, then you have an ebook, and then you can either sell that ebook or you could use that as a lead generation. So again, that content creation of podcasting is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. And I do use it a lot. I mean, I know you talked about not having the video, not using video because you're a radio purist.
Well, I do use the video. I just
but because I conduct my interviews via Zoom, I have the video content anyway. So and it wasn't too much of a step up to really turn that content into a YouTube channel.
Sure.
So the YouTube channels, because obviously some people are visual, and I'm seeing the YouTube channel grow. So and what I also do is, because what I found was a lot of having interviews was also labor intensive. Just sometimes getting these women are like herding cats, just trying to get the interviews together. So I interjected it each week with a solo episode where I talk about a particular issue that women in leadership face. So again, you also got an opportunity to learn more about my thought leadership as well as an interview. So we mix it up. I mix it up every other week, and that's also a video. It's a blog. It's social media content. It's short form content for other media sites. So I just chop it up, and that 1 week of content, there's content everywhere. It's content galore when you look at it.
It is. And again, another source of monetization that you just brought up that I think is important to consider when you're looking at the overall opportunities for podcasting in that making real money type scenario is that becoming that thought leader in the space. So you were mentioning that you did the solo episodes, and by doing that, what you're also doing is creating content for speaker reels, audio and video. So that way, if you are, let's say if you're a podcaster and you're just starting out and you may not have had an opportunity, you really aspire to develop a speaking part of your business, and you really aspire to do that, then beginning with a podcast and using the audio and video components when appropriate, and that gives you the opportunity not only to generate an audience and a following and expand that following through social media, but it also gives you that opportunity to then be considered for speaking opportunities like we're doing today, either virtually or on stage, because the event planners who are curating speakers, they have tangible things that they can go and watch or listen to and hear the way that you present, your energy in the room, because the energy in the room is so important. And so, hi, welcome.
Hello. Keep going.
Okay, we're having a really fun conversation about all the different ways to monetize that maybe get overlooked sometimes. And speaking, which is great, it was almost like perfect timing that you popped in, because we were talking about how you could utilize your podcast, audio and video, to create a speaker reel or to be discovered as a speaker, because people who are planning events and curating speakers, then they get the chance to hear like what your energy is and what you bring to the room and how you present. And so that's a really great way to expand your brand. And by expanding your brand, you can ultimately monetize your brand. So
very cool. And on that note, what we're planning to do through Amplifying Her Voice is, last summit we had 250 speakers, and this summit we have 300 speakers, and so everybody's going to come back again in June, and we're inviting men to participate in this conversation for in honor of Father's Day. But like you have audio to video, or sorry, video to audio, what we're planning to do is share the content on our YouTube gallery, and from the YouTube gallery we can make podcasts and then share that with the bottom billion on these low-cost mobile phones. So it's a way to just keep going and reach more. So we're looking at it from an impact standpoint, and ultimately it's a learning tool that can keep going. Not just a monetization tool, but also an impact tool. So we're looking at both avenues of what you can do.
That's so fantastic. And I think you could actually take that model as an independent podcaster and really think about, so amplifying your voice through your podcast venue and your podcast channels, Spotify, YouTube, Pandora, Amazon, iHeart, and then you can leverage that to then ultimately create summits or events. And so that's the other thing that we hadn't really touched on at this point yet, is taking that, Janice, you were mentioning building the community, then that community becomes engaged with each other and with you as the host. And then that becomes an opportunity to create maybe a one-day retreat, and then building that audience like you have with Amplify Her Voice, and then that expands into 2 days and then 3 days. And so there's just and then that lends to strategic partnerships and to sponsorship opportunities, because as you start to rise up the numbers of engagement that you have, then you can monetize that through partnerships and through sponsorships in that way. Another thing that I wanted to mention in terms of sponsorship and monetization in that layer is that you don't necessarily have to rely on just your podcast as an island. That's one of the things that I think of people think of, I have to make money off my podcast, and they have like almost like a myopic focus on it. But you can take the podcast as part of your overall marketing strategy. And if you have a newsletter database that has a couple of thousand people, your listing numbers, your social media followers, and you can bundle all of that together, and then you have a more of an impressive number of people collectively targeted to your niche. To your point, Janice, you have a very targeted niche that you speak to. However, that is probably the golden demographic, the women 25-54, is a very targeted demographic. That's your niche. And if you can show all of that well-rounded exposure and engagement, then you can really talk about bringing in a partner or sponsor for monetization.
Yeah.
We're also looking at grants, Tracy. Grants. It's not directly like sponsorships, but there's a lot of foundations that are out there that are looking for a different kind of value. And we've just landed a $150,000 grant from the Islamic Development Bank to make a series of podcasts. The State of Women Podcast Network is growing to produce original podcasts in Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, United Arab Emirates, Republic of Bangladesh, and Indonesia. These are large populations, 2 billion.
Right. Really big growth areas for podcasting too.
Yeah, also, it's women that are ready to use their voices. And so we're just, getting everything ready, but ultimately we have the endorsement of a very reputable body, and then also applied for the SDG Impact Accelerator from the Republic of Turkey. And we just signed an agreement with the United Nations on Saturday to take our podcast apps into refugee camps in Bangladesh. So this is right? So it's like, ultimately, it's the scale, it's the people that need it, but then you bring in other partners that say, you know what, I want to be a part of this. I want to donate phones. I want to donate headsets and whatnot. And
things like that. Yeah.
It becomes
and that brings up a great point too about monetization doesn't necessarily have to be tied to cash monies that are deposited in your bank account, because you can create affiliate relationships. You can are interviewing guests and they may have a book published or they have a product that they sell. You can utilize affiliate links within your show notes. And so when your audience is listening to your podcast and they're really excited about a product that your guest is talking about or a book that they've written, then you can direct them to the show notes with your podcast, use those affiliate links. And when people purchase that product, then you're receiving a commission from that. And that's monetization. Or they can be, like, to your point, providing you product. So you may not necessarily get the sponsor may not put money, cash into your bank account for a sponsorship in the traditional way. But yes, in kind, they would provide you with products. And then those products, you talk about them, but they're your products. And so you didn't have to come out of pocket to pay for these products that you love so much. So there's that for sure. I think that really what I would like to also sort of highlight is the scalability, like what you were speaking of, but starting as a small podcaster, because there is this idea that you have to have tens of thousands of followers before you can begin making money off your podcast. And really, that's not 100% accurate, in that you can start generating podcast revenues and get sponsors on board with people that you already have existing relationships with. For example, if you are, this is a real life example of one of our clients. It's an interior design. They have an interior design focused podcast. When they started, they had long-time relationships with vendors, Sherwin-Williams, carpet companies, wallpaper companies, all the kind of fixtures, lighting, people that they have been doing business with for a lot of years and had spent a lot of money with these companies. So when they decided to launch their podcast, these vendors knew the quality of their work. So they knew the quality of their podcast was going to be just as good. So they were able to go to them and say, would you like to participate in our podcast? We're going to be talking about the top 10 paint colors. And so then there's Sherwin-Williams, who can either sponsor an episode or sponsor a series. So I will encourage people to really think about the relationships in their network that they already have, because if they know you and they know the quality of your work, then they're going to want to work with you and align with you. And so you may only have a couple of hundred people starting out, but those are quality people that are really engaged with your message and what you're having to say, and ultimately would be customers of those vendors that you've worked with. So you can definitely start with a small audience, and you just have to have almost like that confidence to ask the question of the people that you are in your network. I see you smiling, Janice. Does that mean you've had some of these conversations?
Yeah, I have. But I think the thing as well for me is that as much as I'm in the Caribbean, and it was you always want to think of people in your backyard per se. A lot of my listeners are in the US because it's diaspora. It's Caribbean diaspora. So you have to get a little more, I suppose you can get more creative. Not restricting yourself to where you are or to your home country or your hometown and things like that, because the reach is so great. So you can actually be a lot more creative when you're looking for sponsorship or looking for some sort of support.
Definitely.
Where are you now, Janice? Where are you based?
Antigua in the Caribbean.
Okay, fantastic. Good to know.
Such a beautiful place. We should all be coming to visit you to do the summit, right?
What's it like there? Can we travel yet? Are we allowed to come?
Yeah, you can. We were open all the time. We're broke. We're a tourist island. We are heavily tourist. So it really hurt us. Cruise ships, obviously no cruise ships and things like that. So we've been open all the time. Pretty much, you have your tests and stuff like that, but yeah, we're still open. All are welcome.
I think the tourism industry is going to rebound significantly. That's probably going to come on so strong eventually, and then you'll be overloaded with people, and then And not that you'll wish for a time where it was quieter, but you appreciate it now because it's about to bust wide open again, I think. You're right. So
Definitely.
Tracy, does PodHive teach monetization? Do you have a curriculum or do you have programming that you can share with our listeners and people that are following today on our threads?
What we have accessible, a challenging question in that is a paid community. So when you are within the podcasting community, you do have access to a lot of webinars, live coaching calls, one-on-one sessions. But we can definitely, I don't have it with me, but I can, we do have like a 3-month trial membership that you can access everything. And so I can get that link, and I don't know if there's a way to follow up with that. Certainly
next month. In June. We'll set it up for June. So
yeah, definitely. So that way that people can enjoy that. But in terms of, there's another organization that we're strategic partnerships with also called She Podcasts, and they have a lot of great information as well, live Q&A calls. And I just, we're all about women supporting women, just like you're creating this wonderful event.
Thank you. So we'll explore that for next month because we'll aggregate everybody. And She Podcast is also one of our partners. Dear friends, when we launched our Sheconomy mobile apps, they were our first podcast that went in the mobile app. So totally get this whole community of women supporting women. We're women investing, women digital. So it's
right. And I think it's an important message that women need to feel comfortable asking for money and making money and generating income and things like that. I think establishing value and cost is something that, in my experience in working with thousands of women entrepreneurs in the startup scenarios, is that it's really difficult. It's so easy for me to look at Janice and look at you and see so much potential in you and what you're capable of, and think and say, oh, your value is so astronomical. But then when it comes to putting a price on our own worth, our own contributions, our own services, it becomes a lot more difficult. And I think the same applies for podcast monetization, is that I think we almost feel like we have to apologize that we don't have these huge audiences in a lot of respects. But if you look at the statistics of podcasting in general, the average podcast only has roughly 250 downloads per episode. And then it breaks the tier into 1,000 and above and keeps going on that. So one of the things that I encourage people to think about is that the average cost per 1,000 for a podcast sponsorship is $25 to $40 cost per 1,000. However, you can create innovative ways, like we were talking about, in terms of bundling your social media, making that number higher. The other thing that we recommend that you can do is, if you think about an arena, for example, and there's always like the Mercedes Arena Amphitheater or the Verizon Wireless Amphitheater, well, you can do the same thing with your podcast studio. So every time you open the mic to record an episode, you can be the Women That Can Studios powered by, and then integrate a sponsor into that. So they get a really great value. It's not tied to the number of listeners that you have. It's just tied to the amount of frequency that they're mentioned in association with your podcast.
Wow. Great idea.
I know I really do want people to think in terms of not waiting until they have the larger audience to start generating monies from their podcast, because it is very possible. Definitely. So
you are just a force of all these great monetization ideas. Is there like a checklist? Would you say like a standard checklist or a guide or a booklet, or is it just sheer doing it over and over again for so many networks and things that you're involved in?
Well, I think for me, because my background was traditional broadcast radio, and so if you've never actually been inside the radio business, first of all, the only thing that keeps the lights on is advertising and sponsorship monies. And the reality of radio is that you're selling air. So you have to literally be creative in how you sell air. And that level of expertise has really benefited and transitioned well into podcasting, because you are essentially in podcasting doing the same type of scenario where you have an intangible product that you're making tangible. And how can you do that? So, but I think in terms of a checklist, like what I would say is that if you're starting out, reach out to the network of people that you already have, start generating your audience through your existing database of newsletters, social media, and other opportunities, and guest on other podcasts. That's a huge thing. I'm sure that's been talked about, but that's a great audience tool. It's a great way to promote your call to action. One of the things we were talking about at the beginning of the session was making sure your call to action generates traffic back to where you make your money. So if your podcast is something that's spotlighting your skill set, make sure you drive them back to the place where they can do business with you and find out more about how to work with you and what does that look like. And then, one of the things too that you can also do is look at other, you can look at the list of people who are advertising on podcasts, but those are usually like the mattress companies, the computer, those are like the Geicos and the things. It's like, okay, that's not really a good fit for my brand. But then if you listen to other podcasts that have a similar target demographic to you, and maybe there's some people participating in those podcasts, then those might be the really good people to reach out to make contact with, because they're already interested in your niche. They're already interested in your demographic. So and they're already interested in podcast advertising. That's the other thing. You don't have to have a conversation with them about the benefits of podcast advertising or podcast sponsorship or partnership, because they're already doing it, right? Yeah. And so then they're already talking to your niche. So they're already interested in that demographic. The only thing they may not know about is you. So you can just talk to them about, hey, you're working with this audience. It's very mirrored to my audience. Would you like to be involved in our podcast as well? So sometimes it's just so scary just to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies. I'm going to hop out because we're going to have our State of Women Podcast Network reception. I'm just going to head out. And then I will send you both invites to our Lunch and Learn on Friday with the Podcast Academy. Anyone else that's on this listening, you're all welcome as well. But thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you both personally for being with us today. And we shall invite you again for the next summit in June. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for all your hard work in organizing this and putting it together and really amplifying the women's voices. That's a huge endeavor and so appreciated.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you so much, Janice.
That's great. Okay, see you soon. All right. Well, I think we have covered every aspect of monetization that I can personally think of. But it has been such a pleasure getting to know you. And is there any tip or takeaway that you might want to mention that we haven't covered? I know we've covered a lot.
We've covered a lot. For anybody getting into podcasts, there's a couple of things I was thinking of. Was the first thing is that, is that I think there's a statistic about how quickly podcasts fail, new podcasters fail. I looked quite recently, realized I was coming to my 200th episode, and that's weekly episodes. So that's for me, it's a great milestone. So I'd say to not get into this this is a long game. Podcasting's and even from the monetization aspects, which podcasting is a long game. So look at the fringe benefits as opposed to the traditional financial benefits. That's probably it's more about long form content, because this will be around a lot longer than any advertising or anything, because people if I go into a search engine now and put my name in, pop, so people see straight away that, this woman has some credibility. She knows what she's talking about. I come from a corporate background. I was a corporate CEO. So, so I just, so this for me adds to my credibility. I'm no longer in that corporate world. So I have to look at ways to bolster my credibility. And that's by talking about what I know. And my experiences and sharing those with women.
Yes, I love that. So let's take our own advice and let people know how they can get in touch with us, because if people have been listening, or the people that are listening to this, I'm sure they've fallen in love with us. And if they want to get in touch with you, Janice, what is the best way for them to do that?
The best way to do that is you should connect to me on social media, to be honest. LinkedIn is my preferred choice, but I am Janice Sutherland. It's the same on Facebook. It's the same on Instagram. I keep it simple. Or it's This Woman Can on Twitter. Or you can go to my website, janicesutherland.com. It's that, and you'll find everything there. Keep it very simple.
I love that. So for me, it's produce your podcast. Produceyourpodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram, Produce Your Podcast, pretty much anywhere. And then if you're interested in the Pod Hive community, you can go to podhive.com. That's PODHIVE, podhive.com, and learn more about the community. And I love LinkedIn too. So connect with Janice and I. I'm Tracy DeForge, which is TRACI, and then the last name is DEFORGE on LinkedIn. So find us on LinkedIn, follow us on social media, and check out our websites. And we would love to hear from you.
Listen to the podcast. Listen to the podcast.
And we would love to hear from you and connect with other like-minded women. And Janice, thank you so much. We've been such a trooper. We really rocked this session, and I love it. It's been so fun.
Yes.
I knew we would, because these women can, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.